Captain Area Vale leaned over the dusty terminal, the flickering light from the old console casting long shadows across the forgotten research station. The place had been abandoned for decades, its purpose long lost to time. This derelict outpost on the outskirts of the Nexus star system, once a hub for interstellar exploration, was now little more than a ghostly relic of humanity's early spacefaring days. Area had come here with one goal in mind: to find something, anything, that could unlock the mysteries surrounding the Phantom Fleet. Her fingertips moved quickly across the keys, unlocking files hidden deep within the station's forgotten archives. Most of the data had been corrupted, erased, or just lost to the slow decay of time, but she had managed to find something. A fragment, a whisper of information. Her eyes widened as a set of coordinates appeared on the screen, accompanied by a short, cryptic message: the final voyage. Coordinates: 582.943 minus 367.874. They are waiting. The Phantom Fleet. The very mention of it sent a chill down Area's spine. A fleet of warships, humanity's pride during its early expansion across the galaxy, had vanished without a trace centuries ago. Rumors swirled about its disappearance. Some said it had been destroyed in battle. Others claimed it had simply disappeared into a rift in space. But there were those who believed the fleet still existed somewhere out there, hidden away, waiting for the day when it would reappear to change the course of history. Area had studied the fleet's legend since she was a cadet at the Academy. As a child of the Federation, she had grown up hearing stories of the brave men and women who piloted the Phantom Fleet's ships. They were the first to explore the deep reaches of space, and they had encountered beings and dangers that most people could barely comprehend. But after their disappearance, their legacy had been buried, erased from official records. Except for this, her heart raced. This was the breakthrough she had been hoping for, the one thing that might finally shed light on the fleet's fate. If she could find the Phantom Fleet, it would be more than a historical discovery. It could change the Federation's entire standing in the galaxy. Whoever controlled the fleet's technology would have the power to shape the future. Area couldn't waste time. She quickly downloaded the coordinates and encrypted message to her personal data drive, preparing to leave the station. As she turned to exit, a sudden noise echoed down the empty corridors. Footsteps. Someone was here. She froze, her hand instinctively moving to the weapon at her side. The footsteps grew louder, but they weren't the clumsy, uncertain steps of someone lost. These were purposeful, deliberate steps, the kind of movement that signaled someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Area held her breath, pressing her back against the wall, trying to blend into the shadows. Her pulse quickened. Had someone else discovered the station's secret? Were they after the same coordinates? The thought sent a jolt of adrenaline through her veins. She wasn't about to let anyone steal her discovery, not when she was so close. A figure appeared in the hallway, silhouetted against the dim light. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, with a patch over one eye and a weapon strapped to his chest. His gait was slow, methodical. He was searching for something. She could feel his eyes pass over her hiding place, but he didn't stop, continuing on toward the terminal she had just used. Area's mind raced. She had no idea who this person was or what his intentions were, but she couldn't afford to wait and find out. With a swift motion, she slid down a side corridor, moving quietly but quickly toward the station's exit. Before she could make her escape, the man's voice rang out, low and gravelly. "I know you're here, Captain Vale." Area's blood ran cold. How did he know her name? She didn't respond. She was already moving, but her thoughts were consumed by one thing: the coordinates. Whoever this man was, he was after them. But why? And what was so important about the Phantom Fleet that it had drawn him here? As she made her way out into the cold vacuum of space, she realized the hunt for the fleet had just become a race, and the stakes were higher than she could have ever imagined. Area's breath fogged up the visor of her helmet as she piloted the Vanguard, the Federation's most advanced warship. The ship's engines hummed steadily beneath her, and the cold void of space stretched endlessly before them. Behind her, the rest of her hand-picked crew was hard at work, preparing for the journey into the uncharted region where the coordinates had led them. The faint glow of distant stars was all that illuminated the pitch-black abyss around them. The crew had been assembled in haste, but they were some of the best in their respective fields. Commander Riel Duval, a seasoned tactician, Dr. Magnus Cole, a brilliant xenologist, and Lieutenant Kasia Jane, a former fighter pilot with nerves of steel. They all shared Aria's sense of urgency. Whatever the Phantom Fleet had uncovered, they would need to find it before anyone else did. But that urgency was tempered by an unease that lingered in the pit of Aria's stomach. "You're sure about this, Captain?" Duval's voice crackled through the comms. "You realize where we're heading, right? Into the heart of nothing." Aria glanced back at the screen displaying the coordinates once again, a blinking red dot showing their destination. It was a remote system with no known planets or habitable moons. There was nothing on any star map that suggested it had any significance, nothing except for that encrypted message she'd found. It didn't make sense, but every instinct told her they had to go. "Unsure, Commander," Aria replied, her voice firm. "We're not turning back. The coordinates lead somewhere important. We'll be there in a few hours." A long pause followed before Duval responded. "Understood." The Vanguard slipped deeper into the void, and with every passing moment, the silence grew heavier. The system they were entering was eerie in its emptiness, devoid of any natural celestial bodies except for a lone star burning faintly in the distance. It was almost as though the universe itself was holding its breath. Dr. Cole, seated at his console, was the first to speak. "Something's wrong here, Aria. The electromagnetic readings. They're strange. Like there's something out of phase. The star itself doesn't match any of our usual classifications. It's almost like it's being hidden from us." Aria's fingers tightened on the controls, the unease she'd been feeling growing stronger. They were approaching the heart of the system, and the weirdness Cole had mentioned was becoming impossible to ignore. The star's radiation was fluctuating unpredictably, and the usual gravitational pull was inconsistent, as if the laws of physics themselves were being warped. Aria activated the ship's advanced scanners, but the results only made her frown. "Something's here," she muttered under her breath. Kasia's voice cut through the tension. "I don't like the feeling of this, Captain. I've never seen anything like it. We're being pulled into something." The ship's sensors started to register a massive gravitational anomaly. Aria immediately switched to manual controls, her mind racing. The strange readings seemed to be coming from a point just beyond the star, an invisible force drawing them closer. But what was it? An ancient weapon, a trap. Before she could make a decision, the ship shuddered violently as if it had been struck by an invisible force. The lights flickered, and alarms blared throughout the Vanguard. "Brace for impact," Aria shouted, tightening her grip on the controls. The ship jerked again, and for a moment, Aria thought they would be torn apart. But the sudden pull stopped as abruptly as it had started. The ship drifted into a strange, unnatural stillness. The crew exchanged nervous glances, but there was no time to waste. The sensors picked up something on the far side of the star. It was a faint signal, almost as if something was waiting for them. An energy signature, faint but undeniably present. "Get us closer," Aria ordered. Slowly, the Vanguard crept toward the anomaly, the crew tense and alert. As they closed the distance, a massive object came into view, a gigantic forgotten space station, hanging in orbit around the dead star. It looked ancient, covered in the scars of time and battle, but still somehow operational. Towering spires of metal reached out from its center, and massive, hollowed-out ships seemed to be docked within its cavernous hangars. "Is that?" Kasia whispered, disbelief in her voice. "The Phantom Fleet's flagship," Dr. Cole said, his voice a mix of awe and dread. "I think we found it." The truth was undeniable. They had made it. The Phantom Fleet was real. But as Arya gazed out at the ghostly structure before them, she felt an overwhelming sense of foreboding. Whatever had happened here, whatever had caused the fleet to vanish, this was only the beginning. Something was waiting for them inside, and it wasn't just the secrets of the fleet. It was something far darker. The Vanguard glided through the remnants of the silent station, its hull creaking as it entered the massive docking bay. The docking bay doors, weathered and scarred by time, slowly groaned open with a hiss, revealing the vast cavernous space, filled with wreckage, derelict ships, and the faintest glow from distant, flickering lights. The stench of decay, both mechanical and organic, hung in the air, even through the filtered ventilation. Arya's throat tightened. The eerie silence was oppressive, and she could feel every nerve in her body urging her to turn back. But there was no turning back now. They had come too far, and the Phantom Fleet's mysteries lay ahead. "Everyone, stay alert," Arya commanded, her voice steady, though her heart pounded in her chest. She turned to the crew. "Commander Duval, take a team to inspect the area. Dr. Cole, you're with me. We'll head for the flagship." Duval nodded, his usually calm demeanor barely concealing the unease in his eyes. "Understood, Captain. We'll be on our toes. Don't take any unnecessary risks." As Arya and Dr. Cole moved forward, she noticed the sheer scale of the station. The towering walls were covered in strange alien script, now almost faded beyond recognition, and broken holoscreens were scattered across the station floor. Some had been shattered by what appeared to be violent impacts. Others were simply old, their images dim and corrupted. There was no sign of life, no movement, just silence, broken only by the echoes of their footsteps. The deeper they went, the more unsettling the place became. The air seemed heavier, and the strange gravitational anomalies continued, warping the light and making it difficult to orient themselves. It felt as though reality itself was bending, twisting in ways they didn't understand. Finally, they reached the heart of the station, where the Vanguard sensors had detected a faint signal. It came from the flagship, a massive warship half sunk into the station's central bay. The ship's hull was dark and battered, as if it had been through 1,000 battles. Yet there was something hauntingly beautiful about it, a monument to a time long past, to a fleet that had stood against an impossible enemy. "Dr. Cole," Arya said, her voice barely a whisper, "this is it. This is where it all ended." Cole, typically composed, was visibly shaken. "I don't know if ended is the right word, Captain. Look at the ship. It's intact, yet it's like it's frozen in time." He stepped forward, examining the hull closely. Arya followed, her heart pounding. It felt as though they were trespassing in a tomb, but they had to go inside. They had to uncover what happened. "Ready to board?" Arya asked, pulling on her helmet and securing her weapons. "Ready," Dr. Cole answered, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. Together, they entered the flagship, stepping into the darkened corridors that stretched on endlessly before them. The ship's interior was as haunting as its exterior, with dark metal walls covered in the same alien markings they had seen on the station. The smell of rust and old equipment filled the air. The power was still active in some areas, the occasional flicker of light betraying the otherwise deathly quiet atmosphere. "Where is everyone?" Arya muttered under her breath, her gaze sweeping the empty halls. There were no bodies, no signs of struggle, only the quiet of abandonment. The crew had vanished without a trace. They continued down a long hallway until they reached a massive central chamber. The room was a war room of sorts, with a gigantic table at its center, littered with old maps and tactical data screens. Around it were empty chairs, some tipped over as if hastily abandoned, others locked in a permanent state of stillness. Dr. Cole walked over to one of the screens, his fingers brushing against the panel. It flickered to life, and a series of corrupted logs appeared on the display. "Data scrambled," Cole said, frustration evident in his voice. "But we might be able to pull something useful from it. Give me a moment." Aria's eyes scanned the room. There was something off about the atmosphere, like they were being watched. A soft sound, a scraping noise, echoed through the hallway, and Aria spun around, her hand instinctively going for her sidearm. But there was nothing. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Cole didn't answer immediately. He was absorbed in the screen, trying to decode the scrambled data. But his face paled as he read through the logs. Aria moved closer, her eyes narrowing. "This," Cole said slowly, "this is not just a fleet. They were preparing for something else. Something dangerous." He looked up at her, his expression grave. "They were trying to stop an invasion, something worse than anything we've encountered." Before Aria could respond, a low hum filled the air. The lights flickered once again, but this time, the hum wasn't coming from the ship. It was coming from somewhere deeper within. Somewhere beneath the ship's hull. "Captain," Dr. Cole's voice faltered. "I think we're not alone." Aria's heart skipped a beat. Someone was down there, and they were about to find out exactly what happened to the Phantom Fleet. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the metal floors beneath Aria's boots. It was rhythmic, deliberate, like the heartbeat of some ancient, slumbering beast stirring from its long hibernation. Aria exchanged a tense look with Dr. Cole, who had stopped working on the console, his expression stricken with a mix of disbelief and fear. "Captain," he said, his voice low and shaky, "this isn't a ghost ship. It's alive. Something inside here is active." Aria's eyes darted around the war room, trying to make sense of the growing unease in the air. The ship, the station, it all felt like an elaborate trap, designed to lure them in and slowly unravel their sanity. But there was no going back now. The Phantom Fleet, in some form, had been waiting for them. It was up to her to discover why. She moved toward the door, her hand tightening around the grip of her blaster. "Stay close, Dr. Cole. We need to find out what's causing this. The signal's coming from deep within the ship. Let's go." They navigated through the corridors, moving cautiously but with purpose. The lights above flickered intermittently, casting strange shadows along the walls. Aria felt as though they were being followed, though when she turned to check, there was nothing but the hollow silence of the ship. Every footstep echoed like a warning. As they descended deeper into the ship, the air grew colder. The faint glow of emergency lights illuminated the path ahead, but the shadows seemed to grow longer, darker. The hum became louder and more distinct, vibrating through the walls, resonating in her bones. It was as if the ship itself was alive, some massive organism that pulsed with a hidden energy. Suddenly, the corridor opened up into a large chamber, a cavernous engine room, lined with strange machinery. Massive generators hummed with power, their energy coursing through thick cables that snaked along the walls. The sight was both awe-inspiring and unsettling. The equipment looked advanced, more so than anything Aria had seen before, but it was also ancient, clearly not of human origin. "This is," Dr. Cole breathed, looking around in disbelief. "This isn't just alien tech. It's alive." Aria's eyes narrowed. There was something about the machinery that was unnervingly organic. Pipes and conduits seemed to pulse, and faint tendrils of energy rippled through the air, almost like a living organism breathing in sync with the ship. A shiver ran down her spine. Before she could speak, a voice rang out from the darkness, echoing off the walls of the chamber. It was soft at first, like a whisper carried by the wind, but it grew louder, more insistent, until it filled the entire room. "Welcome, Captain Vale." Aria spun toward the source of the voice, her hand flying to her blaster. Dr. Cole took a step back, his face pale. The voice wasn't human, but it wasn't completely alien either. It was a voice Aria recognized. It was the voice of someone who had died long ago. "Who are you?" Aria demanded, her voice steady, though her heart was racing. "What do you want with us?" The voice responded, but this time it came from everywhere. It was as if it emanated from the very walls. "The ship itself. "We are the remnants of the Phantom Fleet. You have awoken us, but it was not your time. You were never meant to know the truth." A cold chill ran through Aria's body. The words were like a warning, but there was something else behind them. Something that didn't want them here. Something that was keeping secrets buried deep within the ship's core. What truth? Aria demanded. What happened to the fleet? Where are the crew members? The voice paused, and for a moment, all was silent. Then it spoke again, this time softer, almost regretful. They were lost to us. They were the first to uncover what was beyond the stars. But in doing so, they awakened something terrible. Aria's grip tightened on her blaster. She could feel the weight of the voice's words hanging in the air, like an oppressive force that pressed against her chest. "Whatever you think you know," the voice continued, "it is not enough. The truth is locked away in the heart of this ship. But no one can ever leave once they know it." The ship seemed to groan as if it were alive, shifting around them. The strange hum intensified, and the temperature in the chamber plummeted, causing Aria to shiver. Her mind raced. This wasn't just a lost fleet. This wasn't a simple discovery. The Phantom Fleet had uncovered something so dangerous that the fleet had been destroyed, erased, and hidden away for a reason. Dr. Cole's voice was barely a whisper. "What did they awaken, Captain?" The answer came not from the voice, but from the ship itself. A soft, almost imperceptible whisper of metal sliding against metal. The walls of the engine room began to twist, and the faintest shimmer of light pulsed from the depths of the ship's core. "I think we're about to find out." Aria's pulse quickened as the room shifted, and the ominous hum became a terrifying roar. Someone was coming. The room trembled beneath Aria's feet as the low hum reached a crescendo. The ship seemed to come alive, the walls shifting and twisting as though they were responding to an unseen force. The air turned thick with a strange energy, and Aria's heart pounded in her chest, every instinct screaming at her to run. But there was nowhere to run. Not anymore. "We need to get to the core," Aria said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "That's where the answers are." Dr. Cole nodded, looking pale but determined. He had no choice but to follow, and as they moved deeper into the ship, the sense of foreboding only grew. The corridors twisted, bending unnaturally, as though they were being reshaped in real time. The lights flickered, casting long, grotesque shadows, and the temperature continued to drop. There was something wrong, deeply wrong, about the very fabric of this place. Suddenly, the door ahead of them slid open, revealing a massive chamber bathed in a pale, eerie glow. The heart of the ship, the core. At the center of the room was a massive structure, pulsating with strange, undulating energy. It was a mix of organic and mechanical, the very epitome of the alien technology they had discovered. Thick, vein-like conduits wrapped around it, and jagged tendrils of energy sparked off its surface, casting unnatural shadows. "This is it," Dr. Cole whispered, awe and fear in his voice. "This is what the fleet was guarding." Aria could feel the presence of something ancient and vast. It wasn't just the ship that was alive. The core, the entity at the center of it, was far more than they could comprehend. It was as though the ship itself was a vessel, not just for technology, but for a force that had been locked away for eons. The voice from the ship spoke again, but this time it was different. The tone was colder, more threatening, as though the ship itself had grown tired of the intrusion. "You should not have come," it intoned, its voice like the echo of 1,000 whispers, carried on the wind. "You are not prepared to face the truth." Aria's hand tightened around her blaster, but she didn't respond. Instead, she took a step forward, toward the heart of the beast. The ship was alive. It was aware of them. And there was something hidden within the core, that was driving the ship to act like this. "What is this?" Aria asked, her voice sharp. "What happened to the fleet?" The voice seemed to hesitate before responding. "The fleet. They uncovered something. something from the void between stars. It was alive. It called to them. Arya felt her blood run cold as the voice continued, the words more fragmented, more desperate. They tried to contain it, but they failed. And so they were consumed. The fleet, its crew, their minds were devoured by it. But some were left. They became part of the ship, part of the core. The ship shuddered, the light around them flickering violently. It was as if the entire vessel was reacting to the voice's words, to the terrible truth it was revealing. Arya's mind raced. The crew of the Phantom Fleet had disappeared, but not in the way the Federation had always believed. They had been consumed by this entity, merged with the ship and its core. The fleet hadn't disappeared. It had been corrupted, transformed into something other, something that now existed as part of this alien force. The voice continued, growing colder still, more threatening. Now you, too, will become part of us. We are the last remnants of the fleet. You cannot leave. You were never meant to leave. A deep rumbling noise echoed through the room, the core pulsing brighter, its tendrils of energy reaching outward like the claws of a great beast. It was as if the ship was awakening, preparing to do something irreversible. "Captain," Dr. Cole said, his voice filled with terror. "We need to get out of here. Now." But it was too late. The core's energy began to surge violently, the ship shuddering as though it were coming to life with a vengeance. The lights flashed one final time before plunging the room into darkness. A voice, not the ship's, not a human voice, but something else, a mindless, insatiable hunger, screamed through Arya's thoughts, vibrating through her very bones. She staggered back, clutching her head, as the sound overwhelmed her senses. "Captain," Cole shouted, his voice barely audible through the psychic roar. "We have to leave." Arya gritted her teeth, forcing herself to focus. She could feel the presence of the entity pressing in on her mind, its thoughts chaotic, overwhelming, alien beyond measure. But there was something human, something familiar about the sensation. It was as if the fleet, or at least fragments of it, were still trapped inside the ship, caught between life and death, their minds twisted and fragmented. "Dr. Cole," Arya said, her voice hoarse, "we can't leave. Not yet. We have to end this. We can stop it before it consumes the entire galaxy." Cole looked at her, his eyes wide with fear. "What do you mean? We don't even know what it is. It'll kill us." "I know," Arya said, swallowing hard, "but I have to try. If there's any part of the fleet left, any part of humanity, they need us. I need you to help me. We have to destroy it." The entity screamed again, its psychic roar drowning out her thoughts. It was too late to turn back. If they didn't act now, they would be consumed just like the fleet before them. But Arya was determined. Humanity's last stand had come, and this time, they would not fail. The darkened chamber throbbed with the pulse of the ship's core. Every beat reverberated through the air, through the walls, and straight into Arya's chest, as though it was trying to claim her very heart. She staggered, clutching her head as the mental onslaught of the entity intensified, its thoughts bleeding into hers, chaotic, fragmentary whispers that clawed at her sanity. "Captain," Dr. Cole's voice was strained, as if even he were struggling to keep himself together. "We can't fight it. It's too much. The ship is alive. We need to get back to the Vanguard. Now." Arya's mind was a whirlwind. She could hear the voices of the lost crew, fragments of thoughts, emotions, and memories, all trapped within the ship's vast network. They were still here somewhere. It was as if they were reaching out, a final cry for help. It was impossible to explain, but she felt the presence of humanity within the ship, desperately trying to break free, trying to escape the madness that had claimed them. "Not yet," she said, her voice firm. "There's a chance. We can stop this. We can end it." Cole shot her a desperate look, his eyes wide with fear. "How? How do you plan to do that? We don't even understand what this thing is, Captain. We're in its mind. I know, Arya said, swallowing hard, her hand gripping the hilt of her blaster tighter. But the fleet didn't just disappear. They were consumed, yes, but part of them is still here. If we can reach them, if we can break the hold this thing has over them, maybe we can free them. Maybe we can destroy it. Cole looked at her as if she were insane, but there was no time for doubt now. She felt the weight of the decision bearing down on her. The ship was no longer just an abandoned fleet or a mysterious wreck. It was a living entity, and she was standing in its very heart. There was no going back. But there was still a chance. A small one. To save the crew's minds, to break the entity's hold, and to end the nightmare once and for all. The ship's energy continued to pulse, and the hum grew louder, more dissonant, as though the ship were preparing to break free from its long confinement. The walls of the chamber seemed to bend, and strange, veiny tendrils snaked out from the core, pulsating with energy that seemed to throb in rhythm with the ship's own heartbeat. Arya felt her knees weaken, but she stood tall, forcing herself to push through the overwhelming sensation. She couldn't allow herself to falter. They had come too far. The galaxy's survival was at stake. We need to reach the main control room, Arya said, her voice resolute. There's a central node there. If we can access it, we might be able to override the core's control. We need to cut off its link to the entity. And if we can't? Cole asked, fear lacing his words. If we can't control it? Arya's eyes locked onto his. Then we destroy it. For a moment, there was silence between them, the weight of the decision hanging heavily in the air. Neither of them could afford to think about failure. Not now. They couldn't let this entity escape, couldn't let it spread. The entire galaxy could be at risk. Without another word, they moved as quickly as they could toward the heart of the ship. The deeper they went, the more distorted the ship's corridors became. The lights above flickered erratically, and the air seemed to twist with every step. The hum had become a roar, a maddening cacophony that vibrated through Arya's bones, threatening to break her concentration. Stay focused, she muttered to herself. The voices from the entity still echoed in her mind, but she ignored them, pressing forward. When they reached the control room, it was unlike anything Arya had seen before. The room was vast, filled with rows of strange consoles, some of which flickered with corrupted data. But at the far end of the room stood the main terminal, a massive organic structure that pulsed with the same dark energy they had seen in the core. It was like a heart, beating, alive, but its rhythms were off. It wasn't human. It wasn't even of this universe. This is it, Dr. Cole whispered, his face drawn. This is the nerve center. If we can access the terminal, we might be able to override the core's systems. Arya moved forward, taking a deep breath. The air felt thicker here, and the hum was deafening. The walls seemed to close in, as though the ship itself was trying to suffocate them. But she couldn't hesitate now. She connected her console to the terminal, and almost immediately, her screen flooded with incomprehensible data. Symbols and codes flashed too quickly for her to understand, but she kept pressing, overriding systems, trying to force the ship's mind to bend to her will. The core was fighting back, resisting her every step. It's not working, Cole said, panic creeping into his voice. The ship's network is too advanced. It's not responding. Arya's fingers danced over the console, heart racing, as she tried to make sense of the information flooding the screen. Her mind burned with the pressure of it, but she wouldn't stop. She couldn't stop. Then something clicked. A sequence in the data. She hit a button with desperate precision. For a moment, there was nothing. Then the whole room seemed to tremble violently, and the ship's hum grew deafening, like a shriek of rage. The lights flickered, and a surge of energy coursed through the walls, throwing both Arya and Dr. Cole to the floor. But they didn't give up. Arya's voice was calm, though she could feel the ship's resistance trying to tear at her mind. It's time to end this. The floor beneath Arya trembled again, a violent shudder that rattled her bones. The control room's lights flickered one final time before plunging them into a pitch-black darkness, the only illumination coming from the pulse of energy radiating from the terminal. The ship, no longer content with merely resisting, seemed to be fighting back with everything it had. Aria's fingers were still frozen on the console, her body tense with the surge of power threatening to overwhelm her. She could feel the ship's pulse grow louder, its heartbeat louder than ever. It wasn't just the machinery that was alive anymore. It was the entity, the ancient force that had taken root in the heart of the Phantom Fleet. "We've triggered something," Dr. Cole said, his voice thin with panic. "We've gone too far. The ship, it's reacting." Aria clenched her jaw, fighting the urge to panic. The ship was no longer simply a vessel. It was a living organism, and it was turning on them. The lights flickered again, and the once silent walls began to hum with an eerie resonance. The core, Aria realized, had become sentient, or perhaps it always had been. This wasn't a ship. It wasn't a fleet. It was a weapon, an ancient weapon created to serve something darker, older than anything humanity had encountered. And now it had awoken. "Dr. Cole," Aria shouted, her voice commanding above the sound of the trembling ship. "We don't have time for hesitation. We need to destroy it. Now." Cole's face was drawn, his eyes wide with disbelief and fear, but he nodded. "How? How do we stop it?" Aria's mind raced, the pieces of the puzzle coming together with an urgency she couldn't deny. The fleet's destruction, the strange technology, the corrupted crew members, all of it pointed to one terrible truth. The entity within the ship wasn't just an alien intelligence, it was parasite. It had taken root, consuming everything in its path. And if they didn't act now, it would consume them, too. She turned to the terminal once more, focusing on the dark energy pouring from the core. The console was feeding her streams of alien data, but one thing was clear. The ship was designed to channel this malevolent force, to feed it, and to use it as a weapon against anything that stood in its way. This was no ordinary vessel. This was a tomb, and a weapon of mass destruction. Aria's breath caught in her throat as her fingers danced over the console once more, looking for the one thing that could end this nightmare. A detonator, a fail-safe, something to destabilize the ship's core. Her hand hovered over a command, but before she could input it, the ship spoke. "You think you can stop me?" The voice was everywhere. In the walls, in the air, in her mind. A deep, guttural laugh echoed through the chamber. "I am not just a ship. I am the harbinger of what lies beyond. I am the chosen. You cannot destroy me. I am the fleet." Aria's grip tightened on the console. The voice, the force. It was taunting them now, mocking their every move. The more she fought, the more the ship pushed back. It was an ancient entity, something far beyond her understanding. But she knew one thing for sure. If they didn't stop it, the entire galaxy would suffer. Aria shook her head. She couldn't afford to listen to its words, to let the ship's influence cloud her thoughts. She had to act. She had to be the one to end this. The hum of the ship grew to a deafening roar, as though it were feeding off the fear and desperation in the room. Aria couldn't tell if the vibrations were coming from the walls or from inside her own head, but it didn't matter. She had to keep going. "We'll see about that," Aria muttered under her breath. She quickly input a sequence of commands, locking onto the destabilizing fail-safes buried deep within the ship's central systems. She felt the ship shudder again, this time from the core, as though it were preparing for a violent release of energy. "It's fighting back," Dr. Cole whispered. "It knows what you're doing." "I know," Aria replied, her voice tight with focus. "But it doesn't have a choice." Suddenly, the walls around them cracked, revealing the massive, twisting tendrils of the core's dark energy. The pulse of power increased, sending waves of heat and pressure through the room, and the shriek of the entity's voice escalated into a maddening crescendo. It was trying to break free, trying to tear apart the ship itself. Aria felt her heart race, her mind pushing past the fear. She needed to end this now. She turned to Dr. Cole, her eyes steely. "Get ready. When I initiate the sequence, we have seconds before the core becomes unstable." Cole nodded, though his face was ashen. He was no soldier, he was a scientist, a man of reason. But even he could see the stakes now. They were fighting for the survival of humanity. And if they failed, the entire galaxy would pay the price. With a deep breath, Aria hit the final command, triggering the sequence that would initiate the ship's destruction. For a moment, there was nothing. No sound, no vibration. Just an eerie silence that hung in the air, heavy and oppressive. And then the core screamed. The sound tore through Aria's mind like a knife, and the ship itself seemed to convulse in agony. The dark energy from the core surged, pouring into the walls, into the floor, flooding the room with a sickening rush of raw, untamed power. The very air crackled with static as the core destabilized, the ship's heartbeat growing erratic, the hum turning into an agonized wail. Aria's ears rang, and she struggled to remain standing. The walls seemed to be warping before her eyes, the ship folding in on itself. The core was losing its grip, but it was taking everything with it. "Run," she shouted to Cole, her voice barely audible over the roar. "Now." Without waiting for a response, she sprinted toward the door, her body moving on instinct. Behind her, the ship's final scream filled the air, a sound that could only be described as the cry of something ancient and torn. They didn't have much time. The ship trembled violently beneath their feet, every wall and corridor seemed to writhe with the energy of the dying core. Aria and Dr. Cole bolted down the hallway, the shriek of the entity's psychic scream tearing at their minds. The air was thick, oppressive, as though the very ship was trying to suffocate them, drag them back into its grasp. "Faster," Aria shouted, her voice sharp with urgency. Cole, gasping for breath, struggled to keep up. His face was pale, his body shaking from the overwhelming psychic pressure, but he didn't falter. They had no choice. The ship was collapsing around them, the core destabilizing in a cataclysmic burst of energy. Time was running out. As they reached the docking bay, the last sounds of the ship's tortured wail reverberated in their ears. The massive hangar doors loomed ahead, but they wouldn't be able to reach the Vanguard in time. The ship's destruction was accelerating faster than they had anticipated, and the walls were already starting to buckle and crack under the force of the unstable core. "We won't make it," Cole panted, his eyes wide with fear. "The core's too far gone. It'll blow in seconds." Aria didn't stop, her mind focused only on survival. The docking bay doors were closing, a heavy metallic thud echoing as they slowly sealed. She didn't hesitate. She slammed into the controls, overriding the system with a single command. And the doors groaned open just enough for them to slip through. But they weren't alone. From the shadows, figures emerged, half human, half corporeal, their faces twisted with the agony of those who had been consumed by the ship. They were the remnants of the fleet, the lost souls of the crew, now nothing more than echoes of their former selves, trapped between the ship and the entity that had claimed them. Their eyes were vacant, yet full of a desperate hunger. "No!" Cole cried, stepping back. "We have to get past them." Aria's pulse quickened. The entity had found a way to fight back one last time, manifesting the lost crew as its final guardians. She could feel their minds, or what was left of them, thrashing in agony, torn between their humanity and the darkness that had claimed them. They were no longer truly human, but they weren't fully part of the entity either. They were the ship's final, failed attempt to hold onto its victims. But Aria couldn't stop. Not now. She grabbed Cole's arm and pulled him toward the Vanguard. "We have no choice. Keep moving." The twisted forms of the crew lunged, their hands reaching out, fingers contorted into claws. Their mouths opened, but no sound came from them. Only the horrific presence of the entity itself, the final vestige of its parasitical trying to drag them back into its grasp. Aria didn't look back. She fired her blaster at the approaching figures, the beams of energy lighting up the darkened corridor. The shots hit their marks, but they didn't stop. The crew, now more shadows than people, kept coming, their silent cries resonating in Aria's mind. "Aria," Cole shouted. "There's no time." She knew there was no time left. They were so close to the Vanguard, but she could feel the ship's collapse speeding up. The core was collapsing in on itself. If they didn't get to the Vanguard in the next few moments, they would be lost forever. With a final, desperate push, they reached the ship's outer hatch. Aria slapped the activation controls, and the doors hissed open. She shoved Cole inside, diving in after him, just as the last remnants of the ship's dark presence surged toward them, trying to pull them back. "Close it," she shouted. Cole scrambled to seal a hatch, his hands trembling as he activated the locking mechanisms. The doors slammed shut, and the Vanguard's engines roared to life. For a moment, they were weightless, the ship lurching forward as they sped away from the dying wreckage of the Phantom Fleet. They didn't look back. Aria collapsed into the captain's chair, her heart pounding in her chest. Her body was shaking, every muscle aching from the stress of the ordeal. She wanted to breathe, to let herself rest, but she couldn't. Not yet. Dr. Cole slumped into the seat beside her, his face pale and drawn. He didn't say anything. Neither of them had words for what had just happened. They had survived the entity's final, desperate attempt to consume them, but the cost was heavy. "It's over," Aria finally said, her voice raw. "We did it." Cole nodded, though his eyes betrayed a deep sorrow. "Is it really over, Captain? What if the entity survives?" Aria's jaw clenched. She didn't want to think about that. The Vanguard's sensors indicated nothing in the vicinity of the destroyed ship, no traces of the entity's energy. But she knew better. She had seen what it was capable of. The dark force of the Phantom Fleet might be gone for now, but she couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't truly defeated. For now, though, they had won. For now, they were free. "We'll be ready," Aria said, her voice low, full of resolve. "Whatever comes next." As the Vanguard sped into the cold vastness of space, Aria couldn't help but glance back one final time at the blackened wreck of the Phantom Fleet. The wreckage was silent now, but she knew the echoes of what had happened would stay with her forever. Humanity had survived the Phantom Fleet's last voyage, but Aria knew this wouldn't be the last battle. Not by a long shot. The universe was vast, and there were always new threats waiting in the darkness.